This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey everyone, we have a special show for you today. For those of you joining for the first time, Dune Talk is an official show of DuneNewsNet.com, where we cover everything happening in the universe of Dune. All the latest news, reviews, whether it's Dune Part 2 movie, Dune the Sister TV series, and of course, the many books, new and old. Often we're here with the 4 Dune Talk crew members, and other times we bring on special guests for interviews. Today, we're excited to speak with the 2 editors of Discovering Dune, essays on Frank Herbert's epic saga. As we covered on our website, this new book published by McFarland last summer brings together many insightful and well-researched perspectives on Dune and its themes, coming from 14 different authors in a way that should hopefully enrich fans' experience of exploring Frank Herbert's works. This is Marcus, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com, and I'm joined by my co-host Garin. And if you've tuned in regularly, you know he's also a longtime fan of Dune and enjoys exploring the rich lore and themes found in the series.
Hey everybody, just want to say hi. We're so excited to have both Dominic and Trevor on. I really love delving deep, and that's what these guys do. They know how to do it right because they understand Dune in a way that many people don't. So we're excited to have them on today.
Awesome. As mentioned, we're happy to introduce Dominic J, Nardi and N, Trevor Brierly. Dominic's field is political science and has an academic background that includes a PhD from University of Michigan. Trevor's background is in literature, and in addition to an MLIS, he's currently working on a master's with concentration in Tolkien studies. So welcome both of you to Dune Talk. Wanted to give you each the opportunity to tell our viewers and listeners a little about yourselves and what you do when not editing a book about Dune.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, believe it or not, we actually do have jobs. And editing Dune books is not our full-time job. Unfortunately, it would be great if we could do that. As Marcus said, I'm a political scientist. That might sound like kind of an odd profession for a lot of people. It's basically the use of mathematics and formal logic to better understand politics. And most of my work has been in Southeast Asia. I've worked for the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom to study human rights abuses in Southeast Asia, done some work for NGOs. This is going to be relevant. It's not too much of a tangent because some of my work on Dune actually tries to marry some of the insights I've gotten from the political science literature to better understand Dune. But that's just to give you a bit of a sense of what I do normally.
Hey, yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting us. I'm a software engineer by day, and by night, I'm a literature student in general, kind of all around curious person, interested in everything, and enjoy learning about the world and how it works. As far as when I ran into Dune, that goes back to middle school, actually. The library at the school I was at was very well stocked with kind of classic science fiction, Heinlein, Niven, that kind of thing. And I just kind of basically almost started at A and worked my way through Z, and anything that piqued my interest, I grabbed it. And Dune was one of those things. The first time I read it, I didn't understand it, but there was something about it that very much appealed to me. And I just kept at it until I kind of figured everything out. And I'm still figuring things out. It's still got depths to it that still lie unplumbed.
Both of our names are on this book. I wanted to show this because I'm probably going to destroy my Dune cred right now. I'm telling you how I first came to this book. My dad gave me a copy when I was younger because he knew I was interested in science fiction, and he said, "Hey, Dominic, this is like it's like the Star Wars of science fiction. If you like Star Wars, and I loved Star Wars at the time, you should read this book." And I did, and I didn't like it. And please don't kick me off the show quite yet. I'm going to finish my thought.
Don't worry, we'll edit that out.
Yeah, it's a difficult book, especially for younger people to get into. And I think I didn't understand the layers of it. I initially thought, frankly, it was a white savior story. And it was really only when I got into Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, and actually I first watched the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries of Children of Dune, that it clicked for me. And it's like, okay, this isn't a white savior story. This is doing something more interesting. And I went back and read Dune. And I was like, okay, now I understand. And it's subtle. It's, but you can see Paul's evolution into a charismatic figure and not one to be admired. Somebody who becomes a despot. Dune Messiah is not subtle about it, but the original Dune novel is. So I unfortunately was not quite astute enough to pick that up in my first read, but obviously I am a fan now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing about your experience and a bit about yourselves. So yeah, let's go right ahead and start discussing Discovering Dune. So how the book starts out, there's an insightful introduction by Dominic and Trevor. And then after that, the book is actually split into 4 parts. So covering politics and power, history and religion, biology and ecology, and finally philosophy, choice, and ethics. Each topic is explored from multiple angles with essays from different authors. So as a result, the book represents a really wide range of backgrounds and disciplines. So I'm interested to hear why you chose this approach of a collection of essays from multiple authors, and secondarily, what was the process of working with everybody to get their contributions together?
Trevor and we met through our mutual interest in Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien's works, and we've attended conferences with organized through Sigma University, which is an online university focused on speculative fiction. And during one of the conferences several years ago, we were starting to talk about our interest in Dune, and we realized that in Tolkien studies, this type of book, these edited collections of academic essays, are very common. You regularly get collected essays on very niche topics in Tolkien studies, like Tolkien and the environment, and Tolkien and race and ethnicity. And you don't see anything like that for Dune studies or Frank Herbert studies. I don't think there was really anything comparable. And aside from some books that were, I think, more oriented more for popular audiences or fan audiences, like the Dune and philosophy books, which are great books, but I think they're less for academics and more, I think, for fans. We thought there's something missing, and given that Dune is often called the Lord of the Rings of science fiction, the lack of academic scholarship focused on the Dune series was really not great, especially the sequels. The first Dune novel has received some scholarly attention. The sequels, very little. So that was the genesis of the project, and kind of just see if Trevor has anything to add to the origin story.
One of the things that I noticed was that whereas Tolkien Studies has a number of scholars who are very much associated with that field and are sustained scholarship, they write book after book and article after article. There really isn't anybody like that. The field of Frank Herbert studies and Dune studies and so forth. We're just now starting to see that happening. I think Kara Kennedy is one example of somebody who is kind of growing into that role. So my hope with this book of essays is not that. But I hope that it will inspire somebody, that it'll be something that will inspire somebody somewhere to kind of write that second and that third and that fourth and fifth and then the book and that kind of thing, and become a well known for being a Dune or Frank Herbert scholar.
And I think that last point is really key. One of the things we have in the book, we tried to gather a bibliography of all the academic sources, so the academic books, journal articles. We even tried to find PhD and master's theses and put them into a bibliography. Now, this book has only been out for, I think, 2 months, and it's already obsolete because new work is always being published. But we want this to be a launching pad for future research. I mean, really, the best thing that could happen with this book is new scholars write a better book in 5 or 10 years. So when we were going through the list of the bibliography of scholarship, we found articles, we found some really great scholarship. With a handful of exceptions, it was mostly one-offs. People who were, scholars who were like in a philosophy department, or study. One of the one contributor to our book focuses more on Victorian era literature, and others focused on Byzantine history. None of the contributors to our book really had academic careers focused on Dune, but there was a lot of great scholarship out there. But I think to really have a field of academic study, you need sustained engagement and enough people involved in that academic discussion to have a real community, and to have a back and forth, and have debates, and to have key articles that are referenced by the entire community. And that's, I think, something that hopefully we will see more of for Dune.
An academic community that's interested in Frank Herbert, not just Dune, but I think Frank Herbert studies in general, because I mean, everybody knows Frank Herbert for Dune, but he wrote many other things which are, worthy of being looked at. So, my hope is to kind of awaken some sort of academic community that would be, that would focus in on these things in a kind of a sustained fashion.
Going back to that point about working with all these different authors to put together one collection, was that challenging? Like how did that come together?
I think that the typical way that this is done is to put out what's called a CFP, which is basically, here's what we're trying to do. If you're interested in submitting an article to it, please, send us an abstract. And then we took all those abstracts and then looked through them and, made some decisions, sometimes hard decisions, and, just kind of went from there.
And the authors were all great. Been on book projects before where you have somebody who promises to submit a paper for the book and doesn't meet the deadline, doesn't communicate with you. You give extensions, you finally get a rough draft of the paper, you have to do a lot of editing to get into shape. That didn't happen with this book. I think most of our contributors were really, just on the ball. So like working with them was easy. It's a passion project. I don't know how much people talk about these types of things, but you don't make a lot of money with these books. So I think everybody who's submitting a chapter was doing it because they are a Dune fan and they had something that they wanted to say.
Yeah, this is not something you do if you want to make money. It's very much for the old word, the old meaning of the word amateur, somebody who loves it. We were definitely amateur.
Well, we're glad you guys did. I've read both of your articles twice, and it felt like I was in a room of knowledgeable explorers who have gone somewhere where I wanted to go, but they've come back to kind of explain to me, what they found. And I really enjoyed it. Being involved in the Dune fandom, I've learned that there's lots of different types of Dune fans. I learned at our last convention we went to that there are people who hate the new Dune movie and love the '84 Lynch movie, and there shouldn't ever be another movie except the Lynch movie. And there's people that really only love the books. They don't really want to interact with the other artistic forms related. So there's lots of different types of Dune fans. Who did you guys write this for? Who would the audience be most?
I think there's a couple different audiences. One of them is the scholarly community, folks who are professional scholars. We hoped to be at a level that folks like that could appreciate. But I think there's also a real hunger, and I saw this very much so in the Lord of the Rings Tolkien community. There are folks who would maybe not consider themselves a professional scholar, but they're interested in getting into it. They want to know more. They want to think about it. They want to talk to other people about it. They want to, maybe learn some of the terms of art and that kind of thing. That was another audience that the book is intended for. Is, maybe, your average fan, somebody who doesn't consider themselves a professional scholar or anything like that, to learn more, to get more into the thing that they love.
Most academic books are really expensive. They are university publishers will often publish books and price them for university libraries, and they don't, they're not expecting ordinary fans to buy these books. They sell them for like $100, $140 to university libraries that are willing to pay. And we did consider some academic publishers, but I think one of the things we liked about McFarland is that it's got a bit of a niche in the academic space. It's an academic publisher. It does sell to university libraries, but it also it prices its books pretty reasonably. I don't know how much our book is currently selling for on Amazon, but I think it was around $30, which is less than $130. So I think our hope is really that anybody who can tolerate a little bit of academic jargon and isn't scared of footnotes can engage with the book.
We were talking about how there have been relatively few academic studies of Dune, at least if you exclude the past couple of years where more has started to surface. So for our viewers who may be less familiar between that distinction of mainstream versus scholarly publications, how would you define the latter, and why is it so important for Dune to have more of this?
I think one of the biggest differences with academic scholarship is that it's building upon previous scholarship. It's engaging in an academic community and an ongoing dialogue about something. People who have read academic articles, I'm sure will have noticed that there are a lot of sources, footnotes, endnotes, parenthetical citations, whatever the citation format. Academic articles are constantly citing sources, and that's because the goal of an academic work is to advance our knowledge on a topic. So the book is hopefully advancing our collective knowledge about the Dune universe. There are things, I can mostly speak to my article, but I think all the chapters do this in their own way. But in my article, I deliberately put something out into the world that I don't think had ever been expressed before. And that's what academic art work is supposed to do. Fan work or fan commentary is often, and I don't mean this pejoratively, because I think this is often very useful, but fan commentary or non-academic works are often re-explaining things or repackaging insights for new audiences. And there are a lot of great YouTube channels that do this, that they will explain why scholars think that Dune is not a white savior story. So they're communicating those ideas to a broader audience, but it's not necessarily generating new insights or adding to the world's knowledge about the Dune stories.
I would encourage anyone whose interest has been piqued by this or anything else to really maybe dip into something scholarly, something that's going to maybe stretch you a little bit to, and you might be surprised what you find there. You might be surprised to find that that it's much more accessible than you thought it would be, and that this is something that you're interested in, you can engage with and join the conversation.
Yeah, and I want to just emphasize what Trevor was saying. There's a lot of gatekeeping in academia. There's an expectation that people have to have a PhD in order to contribute something to the conversation. I do have a PhD in political science. I do not have a PhD in literature studies or a PhD in Dune, if that exists. A PhD can be incredibly useful. It's a way to learn about the existing scholarship and to learn how to do academic research, but it is not the only way to learn those things. And Trevor and I have both seen this in Tolkien studies. There are people who do not have PhDs who are doing incredibly impressive scholarship. Some of them eventually go on to get PhDs, but a PhD, so don't be intimidated by the book. Don't be intimidated by engaging in scholarship generally. If you don't have a PhD, I mean, you still have to do your work. If you're going to write a book about Dune or an academic article about Dune, you have to engage with the literature. You have to do your homework. You have to find out what other people are saying, learn how to write for academic audiences. But this is not like an ivory tower, or that's not our conception of academic work. This is something that can be engagement flows both ways.
I often just want to read anything that someone has written about the series, and I think there are some people though that are intimidated, and they feel like, wow, it's been a long time since I've really dove into something scholarly for a while, even though it's about the Dune series and it's fun. There is a level of intimidation, and I appreciate what you're saying, because I really think fans that may feel apprehensive will be richly rewarded. And we can talk later about how both of your articles did that for me and some interactions I had with some of my young adult children. But I would really underscore what you're saying and encourage people to give it a try, because it's a different type of reading. It's even very different than reading the actual books themselves. It's a different mental exercise, but it's very eye-opening, and I would just encourage that. So with the growth of the Dune fandom, how do you both think that the scholarship will develop over the coming years?
I think what we might see is something equivalent to or similar to what happened after Lord of the Rings movies came out. It increased the amount of interest in Lord of the Rings and increased the amount of interest in learning about Lord of the Rings, and led to kind of a resurgence of material kind of at all levels about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien and so forth. So I would like to think that we're going to see that happen here as well, that folks are going to watch the movies, be intrigued, want to learn more, get into it, and then maybe start developing their own ideas that they might want to write about and so forth. So that's what I hope will happen. I think we're starting to see it. I think we're starting to see that happening.
Well, one interesting point that came up already in the introduction section, there's a comment about how you weren't limiting yourselves solely to the authorial intent, and to me that was actually quite an interesting comment, because Frank Herbert, he has been very outspoken on some of his messages, whether it's the dangers of charismatic leaders or themes of environmental preservation. So how would you balance the importance of the author's original intentions against possible different interpretations from readers?
Yeah, so this was something that I think we struggled with a bit, and something that came up when we had reviewers review drafts of the book during the peer review process. And by the way, the academic books, our book as well, did go through peer review. So for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with the state of academia, widespread acceptance of this idea of the death of the author, which is that scholarship of a book or a story or a movie should look at the text and only the text, and not consider the author's interpretation, because sometimes authors misinterpret their own work. Sometimes they have an agenda for, they want to make themselves look good. And, there are all sorts of reasons why some scholars are skeptical of looking at those ancillary materials or those author interviews or incorporating information about the author's biography into their interpretation of the work. And different contributors, I think, engage with that differently. I think we had enough people who looked at Frank Herbert's interviews and his commentary and his life and used that as a way to interpret the Dune books, that we couldn't say we were adopting a death of the author approach. We just didn't think that was, and I think especially for Dune and Frank Herbert, intellectually, I think it would be really difficult to do. And it would be frankly dishonest of us to say, we are only looking at the text if we've all actually been informed and influenced by what Frank Herbert has said. And my chapter focuses on politics. And the way I conceived of I tried to use Frank Herbert's comments in a very specific way. I looked at the text, I tried to understand what the text was saying, and that was the most important thing. But as we've said earlier tonight, the text is often ambiguous. It's a very difficult text to understand. And when I reached those moments of ambiguity, if I thought there may be possible interpretations, that's when I brought Frank Herbert in to say, okay, could you help me out a bit here? What is the text really saying? And that's where I think looking at Frank Herbert's interviews, especially interviews he gave around the time that he wrote Dune or that he published the novels, I think was helpful, and I think was an appropriate use of interviews.
I think what's important is that you mark what you're doing, that you don't try to sort of get away with, saying something that's coming from the author without specifying that this is coming from the author. And I think as long as you're marking what you're doing, explaining what you're doing, and why you're doing it and what you're doing with it, I think it can work out.
Working with the other contributors in the book, each of you also wrote your own essay, which covered different topics. So I know that the first one was in the political and politics and power section. So Dominic, yours was one of two essays that was exploring the topic of prescience and the sort of the paradox of being able to predict the future. Do you really have free will or not? So that was a fascinating essay. And I know that Garin has a number of questions about that one.
You know game theory very well. You must have studied that in your other studies. When did it occur to you that might be a possible explanation around the prescience paradox? When did that occur to you? I'm just curious.
The game theoretic model was a way of conceptualizing prescience and conceptualizing that foresight that Paul has through prescience, because I'm not prescient. I do not have, I haven't had the spice melange, and I do not have those powers, so I can't. Understanding what it means for Paul to see various futures, but also have this deterministic vision of what his future is going to look like. That was really, I can't hold it all in my head, but if I draw it out in a diagram, it starts to make sense, because then you start to say, okay, it's possible that there might be branching pathways of the future. It's also possible because of Paul's incentives, like what he wants out of life, that maybe only one of those pathways is actually going to occur.
No, that's great. I think it actually really did strip away a lot of the ambiguity for me when you showed the branching possibilities of a couple of interactions in your chapter. And I just thought that was a fascinating way to look at it, because like you, when I first read Dune when I was 14 years old, I just wasn't mature enough to even contemplate how that would feel or the paradox that can exist there. So I really thought that was just an ingenious way to explain it. So this is not necessarily a very intricate question, but I'm just curious what process you went through to decide which other types of stories related to prescience you included kind of in the second section called the paradox of prescience. Were those just stories that you were that you were a fan of, or did you seek out ones that would be a good example of that scenario?
A little bit of both. I try to, just for listeners who aren't familiar with the paradox of prescience, this is the idea that if somebody has prophetic powers like prescience and can see the future, then in seeing the future, there's a paradox because they can't alter the future. And if they do alter the future, then the future that they saw isn't the actual future, which means they wouldn't have been able to alter the future in the first place. So that's the paradox.
And one of the conclusions there from that essay was about how the Dune, the novels are warning us today about the use of prescience. For example, when we think about the tools that are all around us now, like big data and artificial intelligence, and how these potentially can have detrimental consequences on our society. So at what point in when you were reading the Dune novels did you reach that conclusion?
You know, one of the things I was increasingly aware of at the time when I was writing the chapter is the Chinese government's persecution of Uyghur Muslims in Western China. And one of the things that made this type of persecution so is the government's use of big data and surveillance systems. There's been a lot of reporting about this. Human Rights Watch has done a lot of reporting. Massive amounts of data on people, basically how much energy they used, how many times they prayed, if they had a Quran in their house, if people went out the back door, maybe thinking that was something suspicious. They had, at one point I think they had like cameras like every 500 meters, just massive surveillance of these Muslim populations in Western China, and to the point where they had these systems that could identify somebody in, if a camera identified somebody's face, that could be matched to a database with a criminal record, their religious history, their educational background, and voice records. So, and I should just clarify for people who haven't been following the situation closely, these people, for the most part, did nothing wrong, but the Chinese government ended up detaining millions of Uyghur Muslims, mostly on the basis of their religion, and specious claims that they might somehow one day engage in acts of terrorism. So I was writing the Dune chapter as I was seeing a lot of this unfold, and as I was working on a lot of those cases and meeting victims of that persecution, and it seemed like, even as extensive as the Chinese government's surveillance systems was, it was still imperfect. There were still things that it couldn't do. In processing all that data took time and a lot of manpower. Well, imagine if it didn't. Imagine if that system could be perfected. Imagine if the dictator of China knew the future, had all the data, both in the past and in future, that they needed to identify the next threats that might come up. And that's, I think, what we see in Dune with Paul and then later the second, that Prescience gives them that ability. They know what their enemies are going to do next. They can anticipate that. They can anticipate the next move after that. That just gives them a huge advantage, and one that I think is frankly chilling. And I think that's why, spoiler if you haven't read the later books, but I think that's why Leto the Second in his golden path is essentially a way to get away from prescience and to free humanity from prescience. It's because of that, because it's that type of foreknowledge in the hands of a political ruler, I think just inevitably leads to tyranny.
And sometimes looking at Frank Herbert and his comments in interviews or what he's wrote on the page, it feels like he had some prescience of his own. So going back to that, the concept of authorial intent for a moment, would you say that what you're talking about is part of his message from the start, or that at least you would have been aligned to the same conclusions if you were around today?
He's somebody who is very wary of the state and government power, and I think in a few different ways. And sometimes you see articles and commentary trying to pin Frank Herbert down politically on the political spectrum in the United States today. I think that's really difficult to do, but he is somebody, I think, who was concerned about government overreach, and the surveillance state was, CCTV cameras had been invented and were being used in public spaces when Frank Herbert wrote Dune, but the type of surveillance that we have nowadays probably was not, I don't think, any unimaginable, and much less social media data, all the data that internet service providers have on our online activities. That's just a massive amount of data, and massive violation of privacy that I think, again, I don't want to put too many words in Frank Herbert's mouth, but I think there's definitely applicability of what he wrote to some of these issues we're facing today.
Thanks for
Frank
that.
Herbert was scared of superheroes, and I think, of course, Dune is warning about superheroes. He did not like it when people tried to take away other people's. And here again, I'm speaking for him, but I probably shouldn't be wording it quite this way. But I think he was very uncomfortable with people not thinking for themselves and turning over their thinking to people in charge.
Thanks. So let's switch over from politics to religion. Trevor, your essay was a critical moment. So focused on like the influence of the Orange Catholic Bible on Paul. So when did it occur to you that the Orange Catholic Bible may have played a crucial role in Paul's transformation?
That actually goes back to, I think, the second time I read it, I kind of understood more of what I was looking at. And I can remember looking at that, and there's a passage where Paul talks about the Orange Catholic Bible playing a critical role in his transformation. So he's very much aware of it himself, but Herbert never gives us any more information explicitly about what that actually was. What was that critical role that the OC Bible played? So I think I've always been kind of intrigued by that. And then when this book came along, it seemed, logical for me to kind of take that question that had always been in the back of my mind and try and see if I could do something with it and try and find out exactly what did Herbert mean by that. As you developed that hypothesis, Trevor, about the OC Bible and its effect on Paul, was there any point that you felt like maybe there wouldn't be enough evidence to kind of fill in the gaps? Did you ever, I guess, question your hypothesis? I did, and I actually still do. I kind of did the best I could with what was there. I made a guess that I think is fairly reasonable, based on other pieces of information and other parts of that transformation process that were described, but we're not told explicitly what that critical role is that the Orange Catholic Bible plays. We are told that there are other texts that do have, like the liturgy against fear, that does have an explicit impact on him. So I kind of argued from that to say that it's likely that perhaps this passage from the OC Bible that he was shown by Dr. Yui, that perhaps was something similar was going on there. And there's some other indications in other parts of the book that words had the capability to cause him to change, to start thinking about things or to go through some kind of transformation process. So I think to answer your question, I'm still not 100% sure, but I feel like I've probably done about the best with the data I have. So well, I think you did a great job, because after the first reading, I had a bunch of my adult kids over for dinner, my wife and I, and one of my kids started talking about Dune, and so we just turned it on, and we were all just kind of having various discussions, and my son and I were watching some segments from the new Dune movie, and it was cool because I immediately just started talking about the OC Bible and the things that you had read from your chapter, and it just spawned this whole long hour discussion with one of my children about the influence of that and the place of religion in Dune and the Commission on Ecumenical Translators and just all this depth. And he's read the book once, he's seen the movie a few times, and he just wants to know more, like he wants to go deeper. And I thought it was really a validation of your hypothesis that I was able to share all this stuff and
he just thought, wow. In fact, that scene in the movie where just before Paul goes out and sees the palm trees and has that interaction with the man who's watering the palm trees, and then there's all those Fremen who are doing their various religious rites kind of behind that gate. And it was interesting because for the first time, my son was like, wow, there's really a lot of religious depth in this story. I didn't really understand that. And so I leveraged your article to expand that for him. So anyway, I just really enjoyed it because I, like you, remember at 14 reading that Orange Catholic Bible phrase and just thinking, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't understand what the orange symbolism was, and you explained that really well in your article. And then the orange with the Catholic combination and what that means. And I just thought it was really just a fascinating exploration of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
My other question is, you also go into the other religions of the Imperium, and the appendices do shed some light on that. But it doesn't go very deep for the role that religion plays. Obviously, you comment on how important it is in the Fremen society and culture, but it really, in my opinion, doesn't go as deep into religion as maybe it could have. And do you, how do you feel about that? The level of complexity that Frank Herbert put into it, and do you wish maybe he would have done more? Just your opinion on that.
Yeah, very much so. I really wish that he had put more in about we get a lot about the Fremen religion. There's quite a bit in there about that, but we get very, very little other than what's in the appendix about the religion of the non-Fremen people. And I think it would have been fascinating to see more of that. I'm especially interested in there's some syncretic religions like Nava Christianity and Buddha Islamic and that kind of thing. And I'd be very interested to hear, how did Frank Herbert think that that was going to work, a religion that was Buddhist and Islam? Those to me seem to be very, very different things, and yet he felt that there was at some level, some way that they could get together. So that's the kind of thing I would like to see more of. The Dune Encyclopedia has more information about some of these topics, but it's not canon. Frank Herbert enjoyed it when he read it, so I think it might be called author approved fan fiction, something like that. So, but anyways, the point I'm trying to get at is I think the Dune Encyclopedia scratches that itch some, if you can deal with the fact that it's not canon. It's somebody's very, very creative expansion on the Herbert material, but it's not canon. But it does have some interesting ideas. It's very hard to get a hold of. If you do happen to see a copy of the Dune Encyclopedia in a used bookstore or something, it's well worth grabbing and taking a look at.
Trevor, just one last thing. I really love how you incorporate both the fact that the spice obviously was a major contributor to Paul understanding what his innate special abilities were and prescience and his evolution as a character. But I thought it was really fascinating how you incorporated the OC Bible into that too, just because, in this day and age, that we're all affected, whether we're religious or not. We're all affected by various things that cause us to make choices and to develop as people. And I just thought it was really interesting to sort of lift out this OC Bible influence that I remember feeling like was important, but I just couldn't put the words or wrap my head around it. And so you kind of satisfied that for me in that respect, because there were a lot of factors that came into play in the evolution and how Paul evolved into who he became. And I just think this is a great example of showing us, the workings behind that for the main character that we follow in these books, or in the first few books anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic and Trevor, for the insights on those two essays. And as mentioned, that there were 12 other authors who worked in the book, and we hope that we'll have opportunity to dive into more of those. I guess last question to wrap up, we'd like to hear from each of you. What do you hope will be the key takeaway for readers who read through this collection?
I think somebody spoke earlier about different, as they grew, they interpreted and saw different things in the book. And I think that Dune is a book to grow with. Every time you read it, you're going to find new things, you're going to see new things in it. And the book, our book, I hope, will be a way to help people see new things that they haven't seen before.
What I hope people reading our book take away, though, is that this isn't just that Dune isn't just a fun book or a good book or an entertaining book, but it has something meaningful to say about the state of the human condition and the world, and there's real wisdom to be taken from it. I think that will be different for every person. But I think if you really engage with the text, it has the potential to inform how you think about the world.
Dominic, you just touched on the fact that it really is something that can enhance and enliven our life experience, a book like this and a series like this. And what I like about what you guys have done with this collection of essays is you're kind of pointing the spotlight at some of those interpretations that have enlightened others and can enlighten me if I read it. And I love that further, expansion of my understanding. Just like both of your articles, I would have never, well, I can't say never, I just don't think I would have come up with a game theory model actually being a great way to explain prescience, and then the OC Bible things that I talked about a moment ago. And I love that I can be shown more about this book that I love so much, this series that I love so much, and how I could look at it differently and bring another interpretation into my life and see how that affects my life experience. So I just think, again, like I said earlier, I think those who will read these essays will be richly rewarded in subsequent readings of the series, because it's things that you may not have thought about before from a specific perspective and interpretation, and it's very rewarding.
That wraps up our discussion of Discovering Dune, essays on Frank Herbert's epic saga. It's available now on Amazon, both in ebook and paperback formats, as well as other places where books are sold. Dominic and Trevor, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show to talk about your book and give us some of the insights into that. So hopefully more to come. Wanted to give you both a chance to share any other projects that you have coming up, or where people can find you on social media or get more information.
Well, I'm actually right now quite busy finishing up the degree from Signum University, so I haven't had a chance to think outside of that.
I have a blog that I don't update all that often, unfortunately. It's called Nardi Views, just my last name and the word views. Also on Twitter, you're welcome to follow me there if you want my takes on the latest Star Wars episodes. I did also work on a book from a few years ago, Star Wars and TV, like Star Wars, the transmedia franchise, focused just on the TV shows. It is already out of date because there have been at least 4 or 5 different new TV shows since that book was published. So I am actually in the early stages of thinking about a way to update that book with my co-editor. So if that sounds at all interesting, feel free to follow me on Twitter or my blog, and you'll get updates there.
You can find me on Twitter at Dune Companion, and I really like going deep, like both of our guests have done today. So yeah, we'll see you on Twitter.
And this is Marcus Gabriel, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com. So you can find me writing at DuneNewsNet.com or on Twitter and Instagram at DuneNewsNet. Yeah, and look forward to more interviews coming up, as well as our continued coverage of Dune Part 2 movie, Dune the Sisterhood TV show, comics, games, everything else. You can find it all at DuneNewsNet.com. Take care.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.